Okay, welcome everyone to our panel today. Today we're going to be talking about the adaptation of international graduates in the journalism industry in the United States. We'll address some natural and some legal challenges. My name is Beiling Shaw, and I'm the Dean of the College of Communications at Cal State Fullerton. I'm also the chair of this year's Journalism Education Committee for the SPJ. I'd like to introduce briefly our panelists, and then we'll just get this started. The chat apparently has been disabled, so if you have questions or comments, go ahead and use the Q&A function, please, okay? So our first panelist that I'm pleased to introduce is Steve Urbanski, who is an associate professor in the Reed College of Media at West Virginia University. Steve has been director of graduate studies at the Reed College for the past 16 years. Prior to that, he worked in print journalism for 28 years with 8 different newspapers. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you.
Our next panelist is Katarina Spasovska, who is an associate professor at Western Carolina University, specifically in the communication department. She is a former reporter and editor with various media outlets in North Macedonia. Our third panelist is Fisayo Okare, who is journalist and newsletter writer with Documented New York. Fisayo holds a master's degree from Columbia Journalism School in New York, and she has been working as a journalist for 6 years. Our last and most important panelist, because he's the person who brought us all together, is Irshad Kamal Khan, who has 18 years of experience as a journalist in Bangladesh. Irshad recently completed his Master of Science degree in journalism from West Virginia University, and he will begin his doctoral program at the University of Colorado Boulder in the fall. So welcome everyone, all the panelists.
Thank you.
So to begin, we are recording, as you all know, and this will later be disseminated for others to watch. The Journalism Education Committee of SPJ this year is very pleased to be the sponsor of several upcoming webinars, which we'll be promoting throughout the summer and throughout the fall, as well as one, I believe, panel session that has been proposed and accepted to the Media Fest conference, which will happen in Las Vegas in October. So the way that we're going to do the panel today is I've got some starter questions for each of the panelists. And before I do that, I'm going to provide some contextualizing information. But after that, I'll go to each of the panelists with a starter question. Then I'll give every panelist the opportunity to add to or to respond to anything that someone else has said. And then we'll close the panel today with some Q&A from the audience. So audience, again, if you're joining us late, the chat has been disabled for a mysterious, not nefarious reason.
It's fixed now.
The Q&A. Oh, what?
It's fixed now.
Oh, hooray, it's fixed now. Okay, so use the chat for chatting. And then if you have a question, please use the Q&A function, okay? All right, so first, let me provide 3 contextualizing points for the higher education landscape for international graduate students. First, American universities today have an increased need for international students, and this is because the traditional age population, traditional college age population of 18 to 22 has dramatically declined within the United States. And so basically, if universities in the US now only go with our typical or our traditional college age population, we're not going to have enough students to be able to survive basically as higher ed institutions. So for this reason, we have a growing need for graduate students, and we also have a growing need for international students. Unfortunately, at the same time, international enrollments have been down in most places due to administrative barriers resulting from a variety of federal government policies that made it really, really difficult for applicants to get their visas while they were abroad. And then the pandemic also resulted in the shutdown of several US embassies and other foreign offices where students would normally be going to get their visas. So we've had a number of increasing bureaucratic and legalistic challenges. And finally, we are seeing some concerns in higher education, broadly speaking, about the perceived decrease in prestige of a US higher education degree, resulting from a variety of factors. And so we have basically a juxtaposition of an increased need for international students, and at the same time, a decline in the ability of those students to join us for a variety of reasons. So with that kind of broader context, I'm going to ask Irshad the starter question for you. So if you could just tell us from your personal experience, Irshad, about some of the challenges that are faced by international students, perhaps during their time as students, but also and especially when they graduate. And I understand that you have a slide to share with us, and I'm hoping that you're able to do that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bialin Shah. And I highly appreciate SPJ for organizing this webinar and allowing me to be a panelist. It's a great honor for me. Well, just allow me a few seconds to share my screen. And here we go. I hope you can see my screen now. Yes. Well, I have given the title for this presentation, keeping in alignment with today's topic. And basically, I will start my discussion featuring the legal issues, because it's the common problem for all international students, and at the same time, some opportunities also. So let's go to my, yeah. So what are the legal opportunities and limitations? So first of all, it is CPT, an acronym for curricular practical training. It's an opportunity for international students to work here in the media industry. And basically what the international students do, they make it as their summer internship, because time limit is between 3 months to 1 year. And if somebody takes this permission to work for 1 year, then the person cannot get opportunity for optional practice training that is for 1 year. So let's talk about the CPT now. What are the requirements to get this permission? First of all, the student needs to get a job offer, and then he or she needs to take permission from ISSS office through the school. And the requirement is that internship will be considered as a 3-credit academic course for 3 months. And that's why usually students take it or make it as a summer internship. And the editor or the editor assigned journalist performs as a supervisor. The person grades the student. And the outlets these days don't pay for this type of internship. And many others, of course, also pay between $10 to $25. In New York Times, Washington Post, they offer $25 per hour, but the limit is 29 hours per week. But if the student gets any job offer in his or her neighborhood area, it's good. But if the person needs to relocate, then it's expensive. And you know, New York or Washington, D.C. are very expensive. So that $25 actually doesn't matter much. Now, what are the common challenges that usually students face while doing this type of internship? I mean, summer internship under CPT. First of all, if the supervisor sees that he needs to grade the student at the same time needs to pay the student, then obviously their expectation is very high. They want that the student perform like any other regular staffers. And they also treat that the newly recruit like any other professionals or professional colleagues. They don't consider that, well, this student is an international student, because there are some other American students who also take this summer internship. So there is some issues like an international student may not have sound ideas how different organizations function here, or may struggle to get comments and sources. So, but the newsroom is a professional place. We all know that they are not in position to consider those issues. So it appears a first challenge for any international student to get the news, to produce the news, when the pressure on them is there to produce like any other staffers. So that's the initial challenge they face while doing this summer internship. And if somebody can produce or create some sources, then their time period just ends. So they are recalled to their regular academic activities. So that within 3 months, they need to build their sources. And when they build their sources, then they are supposed to come back to the regular schooling, and that source doesn't continue. But the tax, if the student is paid, the tax department consider it like any other commercial venture. So tax rate will be high. So that's why many students don't go for such summer internship. Rather, they prefer to work with any academic institutions or any research institution, because in that case, the tax is not a big issue. Well, the second opportunity is OPT, optional practical training. The period for all international students, whatever their background is 1 year. But for the STEM students, they can extend it for 2 more years. So they can work for 3 years legally, but communication and journalism student graduates, they can work maximum for 1 year. It appears as a big challenge for international students to adapt in the industry compared to their colleagues or peers from STEM background. Because it's a very important issue for any employer. If the employer sees that this guy can serve for just 1 year, this employer will not show much interest to recruit that guy. But if somebody sees that, well, she or he can work for 3 years, then they usually can invest time and money for that professional to build up, and with the expectation that they will get the return of their investment. But in such case, what happens, usually students may take OPT for one year, but they usually get offered to do another session of summer internship with any outlets. Usually it happens. So they can capitalize this tenure of 1 year under OPT. That's a major issue, and to my understanding, it's a kind of discrimination. And so let's go to the third option, that is H-1B or sponsorship. If any recruiter or employer sees that they got some potential candidate, they may sponsor that candidate. And in that case, they need to prove that this person has some specialized knowledge, and US needs that knowledge. There is a scarcity of such knowledge in US. So that's the gap, and to fill out that gap, actually H-1 visa sponsorship work. So what are the issues here? First, an employer will have to pay the student like a regular payment, regular staffer, or even more. That's another condition. Secondly, the employer will have to pay the fees for such sponsorship. And thirdly, the employer has to prove that this guy has some special knowledge what many others in the US do not have. So why that sponsor, the one employer or any media outlet will go for that when hundreds of US journalism graduates are looking for job? So it's actually it doesn't work for journalism graduates. So let's go to other issues. So other issues like, all that it's a common phenomenon. It has actually appeared to be a phenomenon in the global media industry, is that they're going through financial losses for years. resulting in shutdown of outlets and job cuts. So in this slump in trade, why one employer or media outlet will show interest to appoint any international student paying that fees for H-1B. Second issue is that professional journalism in United States has always been white dominated. Several studies show. And 2018 survey conducted by the American Society of News Editors, it's their latest survey available, notes that white Americans represent 77.4% workforce, but they also suggest more inclusion of journalists of color. And inclusion of color usually refers to recruitment of African American, Hispanic, American, Asian, and LGBTQ. They are all legal citizens here. So those international issues is not there. And TV channels are the top employers in the US. So accent, fluency, and accuracy in speaking in English appear as challenges for many international students. Yeah. And ethnicity and race matters to win the trust of sources and audiences. I like to say something here because you see with my appearance and my accent, if I approach any top official in US that I am looking for this information, why the person will trust me? I look like an outgroup. So it's a matter of in-group, out-group issue, and communication scholars know it very well that what games play on their mind. Why and convincing somebody. So those are very interesting issue. And if I really dig into something very sensitive, they may even treat me as a foreign agent. It happens everywhere in this world. It's a issue of in-group and out-group. It is explicitly or implicitly works in for every individuals. And the audience perception is also very important. So my appearance, if I say that, well, the US citizen society is sharply divided, blah, 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 they will not convince you if I say so. But if they and white Americans say so, they may take it very seriously. And just for one, I like to address, if you go, if you watch the Fox News channel every day, you will see that all anchors are blonde, blue eyes, and well, yeah, golden hair, because their audience, target audience is right-wing Americans. So these audience issues and these source issues are very important, and recruiters know all these factors very well, more than we do. So why somebody will treat me as a person with special knowledge? So I'll not get that H-1B opportunity here in the US. Then what can be the ways to normalize these issues? So I just propose to making the tenure under OPT equal to all graduates. What I mean is that if somebody gets a job and can continue that job, like the STEMs graduates, they should be allowed to extend the tenure for additional 2 years. We understand that STEMs are very important for financial and technological advancements, but journalism communications are also important for the welfare of people and society. So why should not they get that? And if new talents come in the industry, and if they are can contribute to, it will not add some diversity, but news presentation and the interpretation, those issues may also add something. They can contribute to these aspects. That's all. Thank you so much. If you have any questions, you may ask me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rashad. So we are getting a number of questions in the chat. So I'm going to go and wrap up with the other panelists with your starter questions. If you could be succinct so that we can get to all of the questions that are in the chat. So Fisayo, the starter question for you, you graduated from Columbia's journalism program and you're working as a journalist today. Did you face any of the challenges that Irshad shared? And if so, how did you overcome them?
Yes, thank you for having me and thank you for the introduction. I did face a lot of the challenges that Irshad highlighted. I mean, starting with, after I graduated from the journalism program, I started applying for jobs in 2021 and it was difficult to get jobs. I had to apply to over 60 jobs. And I remember because I was counting and tracking each and every one of them. And there was something Irshad mentioned that made me remember one of the challenges I also faced, which was the fact that employers, when they see that you have just 1 year available to work for them, some of them hesitate to hire you in the first place because they're like, you don't want to hire someone whose growth potential in the company is already sort of stunted right from the very beginning. So I reckon with what he said about making the terms under OPT open to all graduates, like if journalists or international students from journalism schools or other courses as well could get an extension as with other STEM programs, that would be helpful. I eventually, when I eventually got a job, I eventually started getting offers, about 3 offers. The final offer that I came, which is that I took, which is the job I'm still working at. They came with an offer to sponsor me right from the beginning. So there are jobs like that. There are jobs like that out there that will offer you. They would offer to sponsor you right from the beginning. And I think it's important for many people to know as well, just so that they know the options that are available to them. And the visa that I'm currently under is not the H-1B visa, although we did highlight it in the slide today, but it's the O-1B visa. And that's just like another option for people that are looking to continue working in the US after their OPT has ended.
Okay, this is a very complicated landscape. So thank you, Fisayo, for sharing your experience. Katerina, turning to you, will you tell us about your experiences going from US graduate school to working in the US, and specifically what challenges that are being shared right now in terms of people seeking journalism employment do you think are similar to the challenges for people seeking employment as journalism educators? And where are some of those differences and where are some of the similarities?
Just listening what Fisayo and Irshad were saying. So I did my master's in late 90s, 2000. And it was before 9/11. I was on a J-1 visa, which meant that I can't stay in the US even if I wanted to. It was very hard to change it. But even then, I had internships in St. Louis Post-Dispatch when I was working on my dissertation that was paid, that because it was a union paper. Imagine that. And it was not necessarily as complicated to get over the hurdle of getting a permission to work. There was no limit on how long or how much you're gonna get paid. I also worked for the Macedonian service for Voice of America that also didn't have that kind of hurdles. When I came back for the PhD, I think that was a very different transition, and it was a little bit easier for me just because when I was interviewing in 2010, surprisingly, there was a lot of need for journalism professors. And what was important for Western Carolina University when they hired me was the professional experience. So they were like, you have the degree, so you can join the club, but you also, on the other hand, you have the professional knowledge that we want our students to get to know. So it was a perfect marriage. And from the beginning, it was, I think that for when you have when you're on the market as a PhD, it usually is for H-1B, which is a work visa, essentially. So it's a much easier step to get into the education realm, just because what I'm noticing, a lot of journalism professors not necessarily have that final step of PhD. They will stop at master's. But
Yeah.
that was my experience. And again, I want to emphasize that my feeling is that before 9/11, it was a little bit more easier to come and work in US rather than after 9/11.
Mhm. Yeah, I think 9/11 definitely was a shifting point. The pandemic was also a shifting point, and the administration of the 45th president was also a shifting point. Steve, you have been around through almost all of these shifting points. And so would you like to just share a little bit from your perspective as a director of graduate studies? How do the challenges that we've discussed so far get addressed by your program? Or put another way, how can U.S. universities recruit international students given these challenges that our panelists have brought up?
Well, one advantage at WVU is we have an all online integrated marketing communications master's program. And because it's online, it can attract students from other countries and they don't have to worry about visas and all that stuff. But a lot of students, and Ershad's a great example, they want that intercultural experience. So that's where a traditional program comes into play. And I've been absolutely blessed to be in the position I am, because it's a small program. If I get 7 or 8 students, that's okay. If I hit double figures, it's like basketball. I'm really happy. If I get up to 15 or 16, I get a little bit nervous because I'm not sure our faculty is really busy. They're doing their own research or teaching or doing service work. So a lot of times it's tough to have enough faculty, graduate faculty, to help with the thesis and professional project that the students eventually do. And any of you who have served on those committees know that's a lot of work. But as far as, you know, in light of all of the negative things that's been happening, whether it's politically or with the pandemic, I mean, our enrollment at WVU has dropped drastically, as has the enrollment of a lot of universities. But for some odd reason, we've had an uptick in international students. I've accepted probably 5 or 6 students from Nigeria, maybe 2 or 3 from Bangladesh.
Could I just interrupt to ask, this is accepted more international students for your online program or for the?
No, for our on-ground program.
On-ground program.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Keep
And
going.
I think there's the usual amount in the online program, but we've had a lot in the on-ground program. And I hate to say depressing thing, but the thing that's tough to deal with is they're all really well, they have good grades, they have good experience. Some of them have actual academic publications. So of course they get accepted into the program. But then I get to I don't think there's an international student out there, unless they're from a really rich country, who can afford to pay for what most universities in the United States charge. So, you have to bring into play the graduate assistantship. And a lot of those at WVU have been greatly reduced because of the pandemic and the downtick in enrollment, but there are some available. And one piece of advice I would give everybody would be, you have to be proactive. If you have automatic replies set up to your email, those are okay, but try to make your responses as quick and as personal as possible. Because the on-ground program at WVU is small, I answer every email myself. And if I get an applicant who has a good sense of humor, I ask them about what's going on in their life, what it's like in their country, and that pays off because I've had a lot of students over the years who have gotten accepted at other schools that are as large, if not larger, than WVU. And they told me eventually, I chose WVU because, you know, I really liked the attention you gave me, and I was nervous about going all this distance, and you made me feel welcome. And that sounds so simple, but I guarantee if you make it a habit, it'll pay off. Because this year, I'm working with a student from Russia who was on a fellowship at Arizona State University. And it just so happens that one of our former international students from Argentina is now the director of international programs. And he sent this student to me. I had a Zoom discussion with her, and she has fantastic professional experience. And I really want to get her into the program because it makes because our cohorts are usually mostly domestic students, but I always try to get at least anywhere from 2 to 3 international students, and that just the interaction between that mix is nothing short of magical. There's a whole other level of learning going on when you get that mixture of cultures and languages and customs and all that stuff that you read about in books. But when you actually have those students, you see it in action, and there's a whole other level of learning going on.
Okay, so Steve, you just spoke to the efforts to bring in students on the front end. What about helping students on the back end once they've graduated or once they're graduating? So we've got some questions in the chat about, Amy pointed out journalism is on the DHS STEM list for being eligible for that two-year OPT that Irshad was talking about that is good for STEM fields. We also have a question about the O1B visa. So that's a little bit different because that one is specialized for international journalists. So I don't know, Steve, if you want to speak to that, or if Fisayo, you want to speak to the O1B, but Steve, why don't you kick us off?
Well, the STEM, I guess from what I've just heard, is 2 years. I believe the regular OPT is 1 year. Can anyone back me up on, okay,
That's
good.
correct.
Because
Yeah.
that's what we deal with at WVU. And the tricky part is the student, they realize they'll have only a year, so they've got to be really careful to start that so it just gently overlaps with their I-20 student visa, because the two really can't fight with one another too much. So
I think, Steve, the question is, isn't journalism now considered STEM? Because Amy Tardif just sent us a link to this website where the DHS has journalism listed as one of the STEM fields. Have you encountered that?
I haven't. If it does,
Okay.
I'll be extremely happy.
Yeah, so maybe that's something for us to explore further
Yes.
as a community. How about with the O1B visa?
I've had no experience with that.
Okay, yeah, no worries. So Fisayo, do you want to speak to that?
Okay, yes. I think for the journalism programs being categorized as STEM, I think data journalism programs are STEM programs, because some of my colleagues that were in the data program were able to extend their OPT by 2 more years, but that was only because they were in the data program specifically. And with the O1B visa, after I graduated, I didn't start my job search with the idea that I would eventually be sponsored under the O1B visa category. I think my first priority was trying to get a job to take advantage of that 1 year OPT so that I can really maximize gaining a good journalistic experience in the US journalism industry. And so when I eventually got a job offer and 6 months in, the process of sponsoring that visa began, whereby my company contracted a lawyer to work on my case. And yes, I did see on the chat where someone mentioned that they think you have to have a lawyer to work on the case. Yes, you definitely need to have a lawyer to work on the case to file it for you. And basically the O1B visa is just basically a visa that basically all the evidence and all the documents that they file, that they put in your documentation to file for you, is to assure the US government that you are sort of a genius in your field. So it's a visa of extraordinary ability, and typically you need certain documents, including a very well detailed resume and a lot of recommendation letters. So in my case, I had about 12 recommendation letters from different people, including professors from the university I graduated from, and also recommendation letters from people I had worked with in the past, and also a detailed letter from my company telling the US government why they want to sponsor me. Because as Eshad said when he was speaking, there are other people in the US also searching for jobs. So they have to sort of prove or argue the case for why you should be the one that should be hired. And so yeah, those are the three major things that were required for my documentation, that are required for any O1B documentation. And also it also costs, it comes with a cost. Some companies will cover that cost for you. Some companies will tell you that my company covered the cost for me in my case, and I was lucky in that regard. I think the importance of luck in success can also not be underestimated, because there are other people that were not opportune to be, to have the same opportunity. I know other colleagues that had to pay the costs from their pockets. But in their case, they had a company that was willing to have them in their company. And so basically they argued that, they're going to give this journalist a contract, and the journalist just had to go out of their own way to find a lawyer that will work on their own case for them, and also find a petitioner, an individual petitioner. In my case, my petitioner was my company. In other people's cases, their petitioners can be individuals, and that individual can be a professor that really knows you and knows your work and can argue the case, or argue in the filing that you are a journalist of extraordinary ability. And in such a case where the company is not the one, filing directly for you, then the individual would have to cover the cost from their own pocket. And oftentimes, over the years, the cost has increased, but now you could be looking at something as high as $10,000, yeah, for the whole process. The fees for the lawyers, the filing fees for USCIS, union fees as well, all of that together. And if you're doing premium processing, the cost is higher, like $2,500 or $3,000. And if you're doing standard processing, the cost is lower, $500, I think. You can fact check that. And obviously, just going by the name alone, you can tell that one will take longer and the other one would be a shorter duration. And so for the standard processing, it can take as long as 4 months. And for the premium processing, it can take as short as 7 days to 3 days. Yeah. And sometimes the USCIS will get back to you asking you for more evidence. So even after the lawyers file your case, they can get back to you and ask, request for more evidence. And then they would, depending on the lawyer working on your case, sometimes some of the law firms have a backlog. And so it might take an additional 1 month to prepare just that evidence. But typically after you send, the documentation proving more evidence, after you file that, it will take maybe 24 hours or less for them to get back to you, and, you get an approval.
So Thank you for that. Irshad, I see that you've unmuted, and before I go to you, let me just wrap up because I don't know if the recording will also be recording the chat. So to wrap up this question about is journalism considered a STEM field and therefore eligible for the 2-year OPT, the answer is maybe. It's apparently only for data journalism programs. There is a very specific list of journalism programs that have met that qualification. And if anybody here is from an academic program interested in becoming reclassified, you actually have to go in and change your CIP code with the federal government. So just to wrap up that piece of whether journalism is considered STEM for OPT purposes. So Irshad, did you want to respond to something that other panelists have said?
Yes. I also like to address one question from Dr. Joseph Jones, maybe. He asked about H-1B issue. And yes, of course, some programs, some schools are offering such programs as STEM. But yeah, the number is very, very limited. And there are some other exceptional issues. Like there are some outstanding students come and they get the jobs. So there are some other students who come to the US in undergrad program. So this undergrad program and that are always self-funded. So there are some rich people who can afford, but in general, international students, what Dr. Steve Urbanski also pointed out before, they want to come here under assistantship or under sponsorship from the students, universities. They can't afford the cost of education and living in the US. So what they do, they come in the master's program, but meanwhile, one course is connected to another course. So if when they come at the master's program, they face some other challenges. They can't take some courses which actually have some alignment with or some requirements of some undergrad programs. So ultimately, it's a little complicated issue for the international students' perspective. So what I may propose that, well, the schools can just mentor the students in or guide the students in this way, that what their ambition is. Do they want to work in the industry, or do they have intention to go back to their host country, or do they have intention to work in scholarship, I mean academia, like pursuing for PhD and further in those fields. That's a very interesting issue. Many, to be honest, I also have the intention to work in the industry, but now I'm pursuing for the PhD. That's the reason that I found these different ways. I found that it's really challenging to get a job here in the industry, because if my sponsors, even who does sponsorship or offers sponsorship, if she or he thinks that, oh, well, no, I'm not happy with this guy, and I'll be in deep trouble. Where will I get another job? So that's an issue. It's easier to pursue for PhD programs, because if somebody have some publications and presentations at the conferences, they can easily apply for NIW, that is National Interest Waiver, through which she or he can easily get that immigration status. So the doctoral programs are also for continue for 4 or 5 years. So it's easier for any student who thinks that, well, I need to stay here to work in academia. It's easier compared to going to the industry. Well, if that's the two issues actually I want to address, that if that international journalism is also considered like STEM, I mean, to get more provision, get any extension. I believe many talented journalists come to the US who can contribute to the industry. And second issue is that if NIW is easier, that's why they're basically going to that field. And it's understandable that the national interest for US is to work to accommodate these talents to the academia for nurturing knowledge of the US people. There's a very good intention. But they can also, at the same time, they can also contribute to the industry if they are allowed this way or that way under any legal framework. So I really highly appreciate this SPJ and all the participants and panelists. I want this discussion to continue so that they also get some equal opportunities so that they can contribute to the industry. Thank you so much.
Yeah, there's a lot of questions in the chat about that because it seems like we have what we would call a chicken or egg kind of situation, right? Where organizations won't sponsor you unless you already have a visa, but you can't get a visa unless an organization agrees to sponsor you. So we have a lot of questions in the chat from some folks about what is your best advice to people? Like, how do you navigate the question when people ask you, will you need a visa as you're applying for a job? Thoughts from the panelists, Katerina?
Just be straightforward. Even when you start applying, just kind of like say, hey, I will need a sponsorship. This is what the legal requirements are. And in order to stay here, I need to satisfy those legal requirements. One of the panelists was also asking kind of like where to look for those organizations. People, the newsrooms that want multilingual reporters, or newsrooms that cover the rest of the world. And I know that is a limited, but Voice of America, for example, was a very good employer in that sense because they had programs in multiple languages. You might argue on a philosophical level, this is kind of like a propaganda, a mouthpiece of American soft diplomacy, but it's an employer and it's a legit media. And you know, if you have a student visa, it's much easier to transfer it in something that is a work visa than going from no visa. So I would go in and don't necessarily, I mean, we live in the 21st century, and when I teach my students, undergrads, on where to find a job as a journalist, we all tell them kind of like, don't always stick to the traditional newsroom. Look into non-traditional newsroom, look into non-traditional organizations, because as a journalist, you have skills that not a lot of people have it. And you know how to recognize what is news, you interview people, you create a content that a lot of people wanted.
That's particularly true with new media booming as it has in the last, whatever, 10 or 15 years. I mean, if you think of peripheral organizations like hospitals and even large companies, they all have these internal ways to communicate and newsletters and whatnot. And that's a whole other level of communication that recent grads, especially international grads, I think have as much of a chance as American citizens, especially if they're good at what they do.
And if there is a large community of your own that speaks the same language.
Yes.
So Ershad, if you have, I don't know, Eastern Europeans tend to flock towards Midwest
Yeah.
So there is a lot of even media, traditional media that function on languages that are Eastern European languages that
Yes,
actually,
and a very, sorry for interrupting. Very interesting issues that I applied to some outlets, and whenever they first ask me that do you have job authorization? Yeah, and if I say that to accept OPT, then said no, they said no. But I know some people who are very I would rather say not clever but intelligent. They say yes, I have authorization. They don't mention what under which
kind of-
yeah, what kind of what they get job. But when you disclose that I have OPT or do you accept OPT, they'll just give you one single word, no. But yes, that's the
but have
first
in
problem.
mind that's also an expense for the organization as well.
Yes.
So it's part of the negotiation. When I was hired, that when I was on the market, that was part of the give and take. Here is what I'm offering on the table, and here is why I'm good, and here's what I can do for you. And if
Yes,
you
and
want, we can cost share something, but
yeah, and Dr. Katrina actually correctly pointed out a very interesting issue that US media is dealing with the whole globe. So they are also recruiting journalists in their hosting nations to get international news to be covered. Then there are also several wings working in the local media industry, like some journalists cover Asia, some East Europe, some. So why these international students who graduate in the US schools, why they can't utilize their experience? Say if Dr. Katerina is from East Europe, if the one outlet has one wing for to cover the entire East Europe, why she shouldn't be considered? So it can actually help or this industry to, because my knowledge about my region should be better than an US citizen who never had been to my region. Thank you.
Yeah, so we still have some questions, but I'm afraid we're out of time. So just to summarize the great advice that we got from the panelists, in terms of some of our international folks or non-US folks who are interested in staying in the US after graduate education. So a couple things we're hearing from the panelists: double down on your language skills. I would also say, don't just list the common languages, also list any kind of sub-dialect that you happen to speak. Double down on your cultural background. Intercultural communication is really, really important. And Spanish is different in every country in which Spanish is spoken. So emphasize also your cultural abilities. I would also encourage folks, based on what some of the panelists have said, I would also really encourage folks to think broadly in terms of your skill set and who needs them, right? So it doesn't have to be journalism, hard news. It doesn't have to be traditional journalism outlets like Katerina said. There might even be nonprofit organizations, anybody, I think, who needs media coverage, accurate media coverage, would benefit from hiring someone with international journalism training. So with that, I just want to say thank you so much to all of our panelists for joining us today. And thank you also so much to the audience for your very active participation. And I only wish that we had more time to be able to answer everyone's questions, but I'm sure the panelists will be thrilled to have you all reach out to us on LinkedIn, and you can ask questions directly if that's convenient for you. So thank you so much to everyone. And with that, we'll close today's panel. Take care.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you so much for having me.